Dagon. Once again, gotta change. Oh, good. Wonderful. Brilliant. I fucking love this. They've put music and sound into one channel. Jesus Christ. Why even bother? Why even bother putting this in if you're just only going to have two sliders? It's so lazy. Alright. Here we go. Dagon is a faithful, interactive adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's work, focused on story and atmosphere. You will not find difficult choices, action sequences, or inventory management here, and movement is limited to progressing through locations along with the plot. Okay, so it's a walkable, animated story,
I am
I guess.
writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
During the game, you'll encounter interactive elements. Some of them will allow you to continue your journey. Others reveal interesting facts about the original short story, its historical background, and the author. Some of the trivia is hidden. In order to find those secrets, focus your eyes and look for the Elder Sign. Did they decide that the branch is the Elder Sign? Okay, but one thing I do need to do, though, is reduce that by a lot. Lovecraft's letters. As to letters, my case is peculiar. I write such things exactly as easily and as rapidly as I would utter the same topics in conversation. Indeed, epistolary expression is with me largely replacing conversation, as my condition of nervous prostration becomes more and more acute. I cannot bear to talk much now, and am becoming as silent as the spectator himself. My loquacity extends itself on paper. H.P. Lovecraft to Reinhard Kleiner, 1917. Throughout his life, Lovecraft penned around 100,000 letters to his friends and fans, out of which about 10% survived to this day, but his tendency to endless correspondence was a relatively late growth. In youth, I scarcely did any letter writing. I can't read. Thanking anybody for a present was so much of an ordeal that I would rather have written a 250-line pastoral or a 20-page treatise on the rings of Saturn. Lovecraft would often skip meals to afford postage. Collections of his correspondence have been published in various books, and selected letters can be found online. Some readers consider them his most important legacy. You can read the discovered trivia immediately, or go back to them and find them later. Yeah, we'll just skip the trivia, I think. Just get on with the story here. For some reason, I cannot look behind me. I'm very limited in that. Okay.
Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below.
Okay. Well, if 15% is not enough, we're going to have to crank this one down quite a bit.
Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate.
Now we've gone too far the other direction. How about 40?
When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
Is that going? It is going.
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
If he's reading this slow, I don't see how we can possibly get through this in half an hour. It's not a very short story. The Huns were Central Asian. Yeah, okay, we'll come back to the trivia at some other time.
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken,
Oh, okay. After we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awoke, it was...
No, it was to discover... I gotta stop doing that. It was to discover myself sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see.
and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air, and in the rotting soil, a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
Curious about any other signs lying around.
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
I mean, maybe. We might end up being half octopus by the end of this.
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time.
That undulating hill out there is troubling.
That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
That looks appetizing. Whale.
That night, I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it.
I think this is the giant worm. The horrors of the ocean. We'll come back to that. I wonder if there's trivia in every scene.
By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface.
Something shiny out there.
Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
Probably is actually. I mean, maybe not that fancy, but. Oh, other sign. The loner. Lovecraft was not an ever-frowning, eccentric, grumpy loner. Okay.
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express. For despite its enormous magnitude, and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
We'll come back to it.
Plainly visible across the intervening water, on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint, grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seemed to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background.
I wish whoever had done this had actually spent the time to make it look like this was carved and not painted on a stone.
For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the the thing slid
Slight
into view
churning.
above the dark waters.
Slight churning.
Polyphemus-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith,
Slight churning.
about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little.
Well, I mean, he basically... The dialogue was that this slight churning under the water caused this thing to slide out and walk basically to the surface, and then the animation is this thing just suddenly jumps out of the water, causing huge waves.
I believe I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god. But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
Got the Necronomicon right there on the shelf. Nope.
It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often, I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium.
No secrets there? Okay.
The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
Okay. Check out other games and DLCs. The Railway Horror. Why does it take so damn long to load? Jesus.
And scary stories have been accompanying men for centuries. They have many faces and forms. But what is their purpose? Why do we enjoy being afraid so much? During our therapy, I'll try to explain.
No, I'm not interested. They blare an in-game advertisement. Jesus. What is wrong with these people? I hope there isn't another one. Wow, I missed a lot. Oh well. Shall we read what I did unlock? The Huns. The Huns were Central Asian nomads who established a dominion in Europe and invaded the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD. They were known as brutal, deadly warriors and masters of quick raids who also developed powerful composite bows, lassos, and early siege weapons. During World War I, the British used the term, or the word Hun, as a synonym for Germans in order to emphasize their brutality. However, the term originated when the German Emperor Wilhelm II gave a speech to his troops on the 27th of July, 1900, before they embarked to China. Should you encounter the enemy, you will be defeated. No quarter will be given. Prisoners will not be taken. Whoever falls into your hands is forfeited. Just as 1,000 years ago the Huns under their king Attila made a name for themselves, one that even today makes them seem mighty in history and legend, may the name German be affirmed to you by you in such a way in China that no Chinese will ever again dare to look cross-eyed at a German. The refusal to take prisoners was a clear breach of the laws and customs of war adopted during the First Hague Convention of 1899. Horrors of the ocean. The creator of the Cthulhu mythos and the fictional underwater city of Relia was convinced that life could not exist at the bottom of the ocean because the water pressure would make it uninhabitable. Today, we know that the darkest depths of the ocean are home to many peculiar organisms. The deepest dwelling fish we have discovered so far, the Mariana snailfish, can live about 8,000 meters, or 26,000 feet, below the ocean's surface in never-ending darkness and at hellishly crushing pressures, hundreds of times stronger than those found at sea level. Upon glancing at the modern photos of deep-sea creatures, such as the anglerfish, the fangtooth, or the viperfish, and their truly Lovecraftian characteristics, it's hard not to find some irony in this. loner. Contrary to popular opinion, Lovecraft was not an ever-frowning, eccentric, grumpy loner. He considered himself to be a person who appreciated humor. Moreover, he would often meet with friends in his apartment or at various cafes in Brooklyn and Manhattan. At times, his social life was so intensive, his work would suffer for months. There was a point when he finally decided he needed to put an end to daily meetings and loitering in New York cafeterias and resorted to hiding at home and reading with the main room light turned off, pretending he wasn't there whenever a friend knocked on the door. He also had another method of deterring his guests, which involved greeting them in a bathrobe, with an unmade bed visible in the background and piles of papers scattered across the floor. Learn your boundaries, people. Learn to say no. It didn't mention, though, that he was also friends with Robert E. Howard, creator of Conan. Storytelling methods. Dagon contains many themes and storytelling methods that Lovecraft developed in his later works, such as telling the story through carvings at the Mountains of Madness in the Nameless City, journals and characters' notes, The Shadow Out of Time, The Hunter of the Dark, islands emerging from the ocean, like the Call of Cthulhu, or fictional beings and deities based on real events and mythologies, the Migo, and the Whisperer in Darkness. It's also considered the origin of the popular Cthulhu mythos. Some of Lovecraft's other stories also conclude in a manner similar to Dagon. Let's get the details. Dagon. Dagon, was the main deity of the Philistines, worshipped throughout the Middle East as the ancient god of fertility and crops. In Hebrew, the word Dagon was a common noun for grain. The ruler of Akkad, Mesopotamia, chose him as the patron saint of their war conquests. He also appeared as the judge of the dead in an Assyrian poem and an underworld prison warden in one of the Babylonian texts. He is often mistakenly taken for a fish god due to the wrong interpretation of his name, as in Hebrew the word dag means fish. In H.P. Lovecraft's works, Dagon is an underwater deity ruling over the deep ones, a humanoid race with fish traits that reside in the ocean. He is worshipped by a secret cult called the Esoteric Order of Dagon. Lovecraft on tobacco and alcohol. Lovecraft hated tobacco. Even though he used to smoke when he was 12, in order to look and feel like an adult, in his correspondence with friend Reinhard Kleiner, he claims that he quit as soon as he started wearing long pants. He also had a very strong opinion about alcohol, as evidenced by his letter to Zelia Brown, dated 1928. As for the matter of drinking, I have never tasted intoxicating liquor, and never intend to. Having a strong aesthetic disgust at anything which blunts or coarsens the delicate natural equipoise of the evolved human intellect and imagination. Drinking excited my personal repugnance, hence I don't drink. Let the herd do what they will. I'm rather in favor of prohibition, the prohibition of any one antisocial force as well as any other. Right. Which didn't work out too well. The scientist. These days the word scientist is a widely accepted term, but at the time Dagon was published it was subject to a wide debate. After the author used it in the story, critics pointed out that man of science was a more appropriate term to employ. He admitted, in defense of Dagon, that if Dagon were to be reprinted, he would indeed use the phrase they suggested. Scientist was coined as an analog to artist, to be used when referring to those studying different branches or science, so more of a natural scientist. Yet, in the 19th and early 20th century, scientific researchers in Great Britain and the United States were of the opinion that man of science resembled the term man of letters, was the only proper choice among other things. It was gender specific, indicating that science was an endeavor to be pursued only by one sex. The term scientist became more accepted only after World War II, and man of science started fading into obscurity as an old-fashioned synonym. And now being a man of science means you know pornography on the internet. Auguste Derleth was an American writer and anthologist. He also befriended Lovecraft and had published many of his works through his company, Arkham House. Although he greatly contributed to the popularization of the author's works after his death, he is surrounded by numerous controversies. One of his most questionable decisions involved introducing the good versus evil doctrine. Derleth was a devout Catholic to the Cthulhu mythos, which contrasted with Lovecraft's view of the world and his approach to cosmic horror. As a result, the author's works are often misunderstood and misrepresented in today's culture. It is also worth noting that Lovecraft was never really interested in creating mythology, and the term Cthulhu mythos was coined by Derleth after the author left the mortal plane. Great. Do I have DLC with this? Maybe I do. I do not. It is opening Windows for me. I think I got this game for free. I think it's actually available for free. The Elder box. $5, $4, $4. Okay, well, maybe some other time, but not today. Alright, well, that's the end of that one.